Is from Caspian Learning, and he's brought a client along from another genre of, in terms of the military, Lieutenant Commander Steve Clark.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for the introduction, Dan. As Dan said, my name is Graeme Duncan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Caspian Learning, and I'm delighted to say with me this morning, because precisely 10 minutes ago he was still in traffic trying to get here, joining me is...
Steve Clark from the Royal Navy Maritime Warfare School in Portsmouth.
We've got the last slot in a session entitled Getting Serious About Serious Games. And what we hope to do is continue the theme, really. Look at evidence and look at case studies. And the reason I think it's quite an important theme is I was here last year for what was an excellent event, but some of the feedback that certainly Graham Brown-Martin shared is there was good evidence presented in the areas of schools, colleges, anecdotal evidence of how we'd improve things like literacy and numeracy, and we've seen some of that revisited this year with the likes of stuff we see from Tim Rylands and Learning and Teaching Scotland. What there probably was a dearth of was real case studies, real evaluation, real evidence linked to purpose-built serious games or purpose-built immersive learning simulations. So what myself and Steve hope to do today is continue the theme we've seen this morning and share with you a case study. And we'll do that the following way. Firstly, I want to just give you a snapshot, no more than a minute or so, of a movie of a simulation that we at Caspian Learning have created for the Royal Navy. And then Steve is going to take over and give us the backgrounds of why did we create it? Why did we need it? I'll then share the design process, so how we built it, what did we do, and then hand back to Steve to run through some effectiveness data, looking at did it achieve the outcomes we set out to, and then finally finish off with what's next steps, flexibility and the ability to extend, if you like, the lifetime value of it. So, kick off with simulation summary. If we can just cue the video at the back, I shall keep quiet and just give you a snapshot of what we built.
They'll never suspect me. After all, they think I'm one of them. I'll change the weapons, countermeasures, and sensor systems just slightly. To take everyone down with me.
And whilst this is progressing, I'll just give a snapshot. We've created a 3D virtual world with simulation and game elements where we're immersing new recruits. We're enabling them to navigate around a Type 23 warship frigate. And we're getting them to carry out the core parts of the job that they will have to do when they first arrive on board the ship. We've created accurate compartments and representations. Now, at this juncture, if we can stop the movie here, what we'll do is I'm going to show the design process and more clips of it. But what I'd like to do is say, right, before we show any more of the simulation, hand over to Steve, who's going to start to talk through why we looked at building this in the first place.
As Graeme said, this is aimed at very much the new recruits within the Royal Navy, within the weapon engineering specialisation specifically. And these are young men and women who've been in the Navy for less than 20 weeks. They've done their initial training at HMS Raleigh, and they come to us at the Maritime Warfare School to do their initial career professional training, with one of which the following training objective: to look at safety rounds on board ship through the various different compartments. These are very junior, inexperienced people who haven't actually set foot on board a ship at the moment, and yet we're training them this within the classroom environment. What we also wanted to look at with the project involving Caspian was looking at how effective serious games could be within the military training context, specifically within the naval environment. So we also had a sort of proof of concept with the following secondary objectives: to look at a more engaging, realistic training scenario, to increase the trainees' understanding of the roles that they will be conducting as soon as they get on board their first ships, and reducing the shock of capture. As I said, very few of these young men and women have actually been to sea before, specifically in one of our warships. Getting on board is quite an unnerving experience. So giving them an immersive environment, letting them walk around their machinery spaces, letting them walk around and live in the environment that they're going to be working in within a training scenario will help actually, obviously, reduce that shock of capture. But I think it's important to look at where we were before we embarked on the training project with Caspian. We were delivering, as most people do, using PowerPoint in a classroom environment, very dry, very formulaic structures, and irrespective of how enthusiastic our instructors are, there's not that much engagement, there's not much relevance. And as I say, our trainees haven't been at sea yet. They've got no frame of reference with which to contextualize the safety around training that we're expecting them to undertake. So these are just a couple of examples from the training that used to happen. As you can see, not very engaging, not very relevant to what they're expected to undertake. I'll hand back to Graeme to look at the actual design element.
Thanks very much, Steve. So we were given the challenge to create an engaging, immersive experience that would take these new recruits, immerse them in a realistic and contextual environment. And we decided to adopt the following design process. Firstly, we wanted to make this, and I think Mary made this critical point when she talked about an effective design process this morning, part of a true blended approach. It had to be something that instructors could use in a classroom setting, but at the same time it had to be engaging and immersive enough to entice the learners to want to engage in free play by themselves. Now you'll see here on the opening screenshot there is both an instructor-led mode and a free play mode. So the instructor-led mode can be used by instructors in a classroom setting to replace some of that traditional material you've seen, to introduce people to 3D representations of the cabins that they're going to carry out their rounds inspections in, to have a look at the navigation and the layout of a Type 23 frigate. From that point on, however, we wanted to create a free play mode that had engagement, and we chose to fuse both storyline with structured content. And in that opening scene, you'll see in the free play mode we've decided to make some a hero's journey type approach. Something that's traditionally used in Hollywood, it's used in games. You can take Mission Impossible, James Bond, Indiana Jones, the list goes on. It's a well-trodden track of genre of both game and Hollywood movies. So a hero's journey, but a hero's journey that's mapped to Gagné's 9 elements. Something that gives them an attention grabber at the start, a reason for being there and a reason to engage. Something that's going to present stimulus, but do it in a guided discovery way. So having gone through that instructor mode, having understood how I navigate from one part of this environment to another, having never been there before, I can now start to try and track down this saboteur by carrying out my rounds inspections, try and avoid a disaster, and hopefully get to what might be my ultimate reward, which is capturing this saboteur and making sure that we can go to sea safely. We also use criterion reference in instruction as well, a key part of Gagné's model to enable people to anchor back to the structured curricular content that's there. We also wanted it to be incredibly responsive to the learner in that free play mode. And by responsive, we mean a number of things. We mean both safe failure and catastrophic failure. So by safe failure, if I make a decision that's ineffective, we want to give them audible cues that they've done something wrong. We might even want to penalize them because there's an in-game scoring mechanism. And that doesn't mean necessarily I get thrown out and I've got to go back to the start, but I haven't got through at the most optimum rate. So there are different levels. It's not just right or wrong. There are optimum or competency levels to progress through. But beyond that, if I make total muck-ups at key points, we want to say what the repercussions could be. And you'll see some screen grabs here. There are, if you carry down the wrong route, the ability to see your ship blowing up in front of your eyes. And then finally, contextualization, critically important here. If we go back to those original objectives, we are talking about introducing new recruits to an environment that they've never been to before. So we went on board a Type 23 frigate. We took accurate representations of the physical space of these cabins. We took photographs of these cabins as well and modeled them in good levels of fidelity. And I don't know if we could just play the next movie just to see what some of these cabins and environments look like. So whether it's being in the ship's control center, seeing other avatars carry out their daily duties, or whether it's actually going into the gyro room, the sonar room, and actually looking at the kit that's there in the real world, and then looking at the readouts, be they LED readouts, looking at temperature gauges, looking at the configuration of the meters and the dials and deciding whether it is fit for purpose, it's working properly, or whether I've got to report back because there is something that is ineffective and not working. There's also the ability to choose how you analyze something. And there are different ways of analyzing, whether I use something called a mimic chip, whether I actually have a look at the temperature gauge on the front of a machine. There are right and wrong ways to effectively analyze particular kit that's there. And then lastly, replayability. We wanted to have random events in there, so to not make sure that I can immerse myself in this journey and experience something totally different the next time round. Whether the readouts are different, whether I arrive in a cabin and a fire's kicked off or there's a spillage. And this gives us the ability to enable people to want to go back into it, experience a different scenario, change their decision, but still see if they can get through it, and not just survive, but doing it an optimum way.
Thank you. In terms of the evaluation aspect of this, you've seen the level of fidelity through some of the screenshots and some of the video that Graeme has shown. We looked at the evaluation on a couple of different levels. Obviously from the student perspective, our trainees, and how effective the training was transferred to them, but also from the instructor's point of view, and ultimately from my point of view as the customer. We looked at it from two different perspectives, from the empirical data to establish quantitative elements, but also the qualitative aspect, how the look and feel was appreciated and understood, etc. But what we looked at from the data point of view, we looked at pass rates, whether the training that the Mills, this project delivered, could actually influence the pass rates, the first-time pass rates of our trainees, but also additional tuition that they undertook. Pass rates wasn't effective from our point of view because the module was such a small element of the overall course that we couldn't, with any certainty, say that this training had any positive impact on the first-time pass rates. But what we could look at was the element of additional tuition that our trainees were forced to undertake if they didn't get it the first time round. And this is something that we call the brought up to standard BUTS activity, where trainees go back to the instructors and ask for help, essentially, on a particular module, whatever. With the weapon engineering training that they undertake, we found historically that there are 3 modules where the BUTS activity is quite high. The rounds training, where Caspian's solution is applied, but also with electrical safety modules and explosive safety modules. So we looked at 10 courses that went through the Mills package, and we looked at 10 courses that went through before we introduced the Caspian package. And what we see there is, pre the serious games introduction, with the round safety, 10 students out of 76 required additional tuition. But after the introduction of the serious games, we only found 5 out of 83 required additional instructor time commitment to get them up to the correct standard that we require them to be at. Now, obviously, you should never show stats on presentations, and you can prove anything you can, anything you wish to, with statistics. But this is indicative of the fact that this training did have a positive impact and a positive effect on our trainees' ability to achieve the objectives that we required them to achieve. Now, in terms of the qualitative aspects, the look and feel, We sent out a post-course questionnaire to each trainee that underwent this training with some of the comments on the screen. They liked it. They liked the immersive feel. They liked the gameplay elements. They liked the fact that they'd actually see what they were being expected to undertake when they got on board the ships. From the instructor's point of view, they saw the benefit immediately. They were key to all the development anyway, but they really bought into this when it was delivered in the classroom. And from their point of view, their classrooms had never been so quiet as they have since the introduction of this project, purely because the trainees are that much more focused on the objective at hand. And from my point of view as the ultimate customer, we've received a very high fidelity training package that yes, there are flaws in it, yes, it's not perfect, but that's for us to develop. In terms of the original objective, to prove the concept of serious games as an effective training medium, I think we've done that. I'll let you talk about that.
Thanks, Steve. Before I talk about this, the one thing I'd like to say is, as a company, when we first heard, okay, we didn't transform pass rates, you're disappointed. But then you look at it in totality and you realize how small a piece of content we were dealing with versus the final pass rate and the amount of content that's being dealt with there that you haven't touched. And in addition to that, what we're delighted at is when you look at that BUTS activity, because that removes other variables. I had a conversation just yesterday about some of the data linked to, for example, those of you that saw Tim Ryland's presentation and the improvement in MIST. And I think it was incredibly engaging. It was incredibly inspiring. But the question asked of me is, if you gave that teacher a ball of string and a roll of sellotape, he'd produce a wonderfully compelling, interesting lesson. And I think that's true. So how much of it is entirely down to MIST to the game, and how much of it is down to the other variables at play? Well, what we've done by drilling down at this BUTS activity is say there were 3 courses, and these 3 courses were problematic. And the only thing that's changed between one cohort and the other cohort is in that rounds area, the introduction of a new media of learning. So we've been able to remove those other variables that would have muddied the pass marks and say this is the effect it has in that particular type of content. In addition to that, we put this forward last year in November for the E-Learning Age Award. It's only been going 2 years. It's an award called Best Learning Game, Simulation or Virtual World. It's judged by an independent panel. There's people in this room that I know of our industry peers that are involved in it. And I'm delighted to say that as a result of the input from the Royal Navy, the subject matter expertise, the instructional expertise, and some of those people in the room, and the design team back at Caspian's office, we were won the gold award for it. So from an independent analysis, we're delighted. Now, it's not perfect. We're continuing to develop and iterate. And I communicated earlier on to the team at Collingwood that the latest iteration is now ready for delivery for them, which iron out some of those learner feedback development options. But the reason we can do that is the package was developed in this engine. It was developed in an engine we've built since 2002. We might be called the old lag of the serious games industry. We've been around 8 years. I prefer Big Brother, but some people may say old lag. And we've been developing this technology that enables us to say once we've developed something, be it a proof of concept, a concept demonstrator, reusing it, updating it, extending it is incredibly easy for us to do. And that's entirely the opportunity we have in front of us, not just to improve some of those elements that we wanted to improve in Mills, but the art exists there. The 3D environments exist. To put new content, to create the ship's bridge and create new scenarios is now an opportunity that the engine and the Royal Navy have in front of them. So, hopefully what we've done is continue the theme of this morning and say we've gone some way towards providing a level of evidence, a level of structure to say that purpose-built serious games, when we're looking to replace or augment what is already in place in those environments, from Mary's presentation, from Richard's presentation, and from this one, there is increasing banks of evidence that this stuff works. Thank you very much. And Dan, 5 minutes for any questions. I can't see any of you, so I don't know if there are any hands up anyway. That's better.
How did this relationship start? In terms of, did you approach the Navy, or did the Navy approach you?
We as the Customer and Maritime Warfare School recognised that we had a potential training need. We were aware of serious games and the plethora of activity in games-based learning and the developments that were taking place. And we were a very forward-thinking command chain, and we realised that we weren't taking advantage of this. So we looked at our internal training areas and looked at areas that could benefit and be used as a proof of concept. And the rounds area is one specific area, as I've identified, needed better methodology and media for training. So we went to Kinetic as the accepted experts within the MOD, and that started the relationship. So we approached Kinetic, and then through Kinetic we got involved with Caspian, used Thinking Worlds, and we've got what we've achieved.
And Kinetic and Collingwood set up the traditional vendor assessment process. So it was a competitive process where different development houses were brought in and had to present a solution on what they would do. Question right at the back.
Thank you. My name is Wim from Belgium. One of the goals of the game is showing the students the actual reality of a ship. Would it be possible to make a game using video footage instead of 3D? Because that would be even more realistic.
Absolutely. I mean, of course it's possible. You see many fly-throughs, walk-throughs created with high-definition video images. However, there were other objectives of the game. Number one is that we wanted a huge amount of active participation of the learners, engagement and immersion. So to sit and watch and look at video images wasn't as immersive as placing them within a realistic contextual 3D environment that they can navigate and control that navigation for themselves. In addition to that, we get brought in, as I'm sure many other serious games and games companies do, to go beyond and I suppose supply a level of reusability, updatability that doesn't exist easily with video-based learning. Now that's not to say that it doesn't have its place and it doesn't have its role, but the fact we have that environment, the ability to repurpose, the ability to add new scenarios without having to write a line of code, a line of script, is pretty compelling. You see that a lot in interpersonal video, where they used to do interpersonal representations, interviewing skills, grievance procedures, but then they've got to get the actors back to refilm a new slot, do a new scenario, this type of technology, and then we saw it again with Mary's avatar creation exercise, is the ability to create those scenarios, change them and update them is a benefit of this type of technology.
I would just like to echo as well, the key thing from our point of view was the interaction and the fact that we expect our trainees to actually do the rounds, to make the decisions, to find the faults, and they wouldn't be able to do that through video.
There was a question right down the front as well. Okay, there's one there.
I'm impressed by your improvement because I've seen some of the work you did before, I mean, for bowler mats. But the cost seems like very expensive. So if this is going to be used by formal education, what is the startup cost and how about the long-term cost?
Okay. As we're under public sector procurement rules, I can't tell you exactly what the budget was, but let's say to develop this game is not in the hundreds of thousands of pounds as typically associated with games technology. You can develop an hour's worth of simulation to this fidelity for tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. So it starts to bring it within competitive realms of traditional e-learning. And then to answer your second question, which I think is the most important point, which is the through-life capability management of this type of technology, the lifetime cost is where you get massive savings. Because after you've invested in building those art assets, you have the environments, you have that intellectual property to enable you to put hour 2, 3, 4, 5 at vastly reduced rates. And in terms of different genres and different fidelities, that is entirely down to budget. You know, technology advances. You have a look at 5 years ago at PlayStation 2 games. They don't look anything like they do now. But as technology advances, you make a decision on fidelity based on the objectives you're trying to achieve, the learner profile that you're going to, the budget you have, and the technical architecture that you're going into. And we were fortunate in this scenario that when we were looking at the machines, we could take accurate physical representations of them and produce high-definition images. The reason being is the budget and the technical architecture allowed, but more importantly, the type of learning we were focused on demanded it. We had to have contextual reality. There was a question right at the front.
I'm Inga Legay. I'm game designer. Where did game narrative come from? You were talking about that there was a critical fusion between game narrative and structured curricula. Where did the narrative come from? And if you're talking about replayability, is that to say that there were different narratives or different challenges? Where did it come from?
Okay, I think in terms of I'll deal with the replayability issue. In terms of that aspect and the randomization of the game element, within the rounds procedure, and you saw the avatar on the flight deck at the start, he then receives a rounds chit, which tells him what his objectives are for that particular game. Now he would have maybe 3 compartments out of, say, 20 that you have to go and inspect and check and make sure we're all accurate. So from a replayability, he would never necessarily get the same compartments each time he plays the game. So the same trainee would go in one lesson and have 3 different compartments to do. The next lesson he would have a completely different 4 or 5 or whatever it might be. Yeah. So the replayability element is built in through the randomization. In terms of the game narrative, that came from Caspian.
Yeah. The game narrative, we chose, we actually started with a focus group, and we had some of the instructional team down there, and we were brainstorming different ideas. There are a whole variety of different design methods that you can choose to decide what narrative do I want to choose. Now, we did that obviously in collaboration with some of the subject matter experts. The instructor mode is very much a mode that enables an instructor to embed it in a traditional classroom setting. So there is no narrative over the top of that. But in the free play mode, we wanted to add some additional game elements, scoring, randomness and replayability. But we also wanted to introduce a narrative that would enable us to take that structured curricula, which may be arriving at this machine, looking at the readout and is it effective or not. You start to be limited around what stories you can create. Why would it go wrong? Is it just part of the day job? Well, if it is, it's not a great story. So we wanted to be able to introduce that story to add a level of intrigue, a level of an endpoint, a goal at the end of it, to make sure that not only have I survived, but the ship's safe, it's secure, we're off and ready for seaworthiness, if you like.
Yes.
Did the game actually impact the ability of the young recruits to adapt to the real life on ship?
We haven't got that far in the evaluation yet, I would suggest. We introduced this in September last year. The 10 courses that have gone through completed in December, just before Christmas, and we've done the analysis since then. The next stage and the ideal element of the analysis would be to go 6 months down the line and see how the trainees actually performed when they reached their first jobs. Now that's the next level, but that'll be at least 6 to 10 months away. So yeah, so how much did their training within MWS impact their position on board ship? It would be difficult, but that's further down the line.
Better call it there, it's 11?
Must be the coffee calling.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I'm
Steve.
around
Thank
for
you,
the rest
Graeme.
of the day as well. Thank you.
Well done, guys.